Hey everyone, welcome to Modern Sales Power Hour. Super pumped to have everyone here today. We have a really amazing guest here joining us, Travis Bryant of Redpoint, but he's at Redpoint now. I guess he's more famous for his time at Optimizely Front and Salesforce. I'm really excited to have him here as our guest. And so while we're kind of waiting for folks to trickle in here and join, love for folks to kind of get familiar with the Zoom webinar interface here. So this event, Modern Power Hour, is all about audience participation, right? So the whole idea here is for us to answer your questions, right? We have a bunch of questions that were asked ahead of time, submitted ahead of time, but really the whole idea here is to kind of get really tactical advice from Travis, from myself, et cetera. And so the way that you're going to do that is you're going to use the chat panel, you use the Q&A panel, you're going to send up smoke signals, et cetera. And so folks, if you can drop into the chat where you're calling in from, that would be delightful. So I'm here in San Francisco, as is Travis. And so and let us know what you're most excited about learning from your guests. So while folks are kind of trickling in, Travis, any big plans this weekend? I know you got the newborn. He's just like diapers all the time.
Oh yeah, it's pretty exotic around here. It's keeping two sub 3-year-olds alive at the same time, which is proving to be it's n times n complexity. I'm finding out it's not just when you add the second one. It's not addition. It's multiplication.
Right. I mean, but you manage SDRs though at some point in your career, so it's like this isn't new.
Easy, Pete. You can get away with that, but I don't have the luxury of that joke. Ironically, my wife is the more talented sales leader of the two, so she's maybe a candidate for a subsequent power hour because she's really in it, and so our evening conversations are quite interesting, talking about forecasting techniques and AE hiring approaches.
Naturally, yeah. Travis's wife is the VP of sales at Aurora Solar. So I don't know how many like husband wife sales leader duos there are. I mean, I'm sure there's more than the Bryants, the Bryant Buckles. But I don't think there's that many. So anyway, okay. So welcome everybody. For those who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales operations, revenue operations, sales development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those related and supporting disciplines. The community's mission is to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer the questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. So that's the whole reason why we're here. And so the way that we do that is through great live sessions like this, like you're about to experience, through our robust online forum, and trickling in here kind of more in-person events that are kind of coming back online there, which is great. And so for those who weren't previously admitted to MSP, we're going to go ahead and add you there. So before we get started, couple reminders. Power Hour is a unique format. It's not about like a specific piece of content that we're going to be talking through or whatever. The whole idea here is to extract tactical advice from our illustrious guest, and like maybe I might be able to add something. We'll see. Maybe I'll just do color. And so the whole idea here is that you're here to learn. And so the idea here is rapid fire Q&A. We want you to ask your questions. We want you to use the chat. We want you to use the Q&A tab, all of those different things. And so with that, let's go ahead and head into some introductions here. Since everyone's probably familiar with me, I'll make mine really super quick here. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Modern Sales Pros, but I'm also the founder and go-to-market leader at Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use data and metrics to improve rep performance. So that's kind of my deal there. Travis, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? You can let people know what you do right now, but probably more pertinent would be that which you did before, and kind of like the different sales motions that you've had the pleasure of banging your head against, et cetera.
Yeah, Well, thanks for having me, Pete. This is fun. I think the last time we caught up was in a similar type of conversation, just over margaritas.
Yeah.
So we won't do that now in the AM.
Where,
But
darn, I forgot mine, man. I only got my coffee.
yeah, I'm stoked to be part of it. So thanks for having me. Yeah, so I run a very fancily named team at Redpoint called Founder Experience. But the way you could think about it is effectively the sales team for Redpoint. If you think venture capital is a industry that has an undifferentiated product, by definition, it's just money. And so thinking about our relationships with founders in the same way that great companies think about their customers, and trying to design a sales process all the way on to onboarding and beyond, instilling concepts from my previous life is what I'm doing now at Redpoint. And so then prior to that was 15 years in sales. I stumbled into sales, was a shitty developer, Oracle 8i DBA and Java developer when I started my career, and then realized I wasn't particularly naturally great at that, but I could explain what the product did to people in a way that made sense. And that lends itself really well to being an SE. And so that was my first bite of the apple. And then I spent 7 years at Salesforce during some very formative times prior to even calling it the cloud and being the Eye of Mordor, a 61-story tower downtown. Yeah, so really special time to be there. I was there for 7 years. And then as Pete said, I ran global sales at Optimizely from pre-Series A. We were about 7 million in run rate to just about 100 million over my 5-year tenure. And then had a slightly shorter tenure at Front, which I'm happy to talk about too, in terms of tactics and lessons learned from that time. And so then that's how I stumbled into this Redpoint gig.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, a lot of really kind of interesting sales motions there. I mean, obviously, like the Salesforce sales motion was, innovated pretty much developed and innovated the mid-market inside sales driven kind of like SaaS motion, obviously with the with the predictable revenue kicker, right? A little like abstraction, like SDR abstraction plus like slinging SaaS inside as opposed to outside. And then of course Optimizely is a really interesting sales motion, probably at the vanguard of product tech, maybe a little too early. But there's a lot of organizations that kind of came behind afterwards, kind of like that are the beneficiaries of the work that was done there from a go-to-market standpoint. Yeah, so I think we had a bunch of really interesting questions that were kind of asked ahead of time here. And so what I would love to do is actually, so you used to be an SE, which is interesting.
Well, the tribe of SEs, once an SE, always an SE. There's a pretty good secret handshake that we all maintain.
You have like the tattoo under your arm or something there, right? Like the
no
special
demo without discovery. That was what it was on the inside. Never a demo without discovery. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. And then this was the time before like cores are gone too. So like nowadays you could authenticate that and be like, yeah, you want me to set up a demo environment? Yeah, just send me the link to the disco call. Yeah, just but I think there's an interesting thing here, and one of the things that someone was asking about earlier was around like what's the role of the AE in the PLG world? What's the role of an SE in a modern SaaS environment, where like the whole idea around SaaS is like we're reducing complexity, making it like the super thin edge of the wedge to get into an organization, like especially if you've got like pure PLG. But even if you don't, right, like whether you're Optimizely or Amplitude or whatever, and it's not like, but like a business user can maybe get themselves set up, or an AE can get something set up. Like, where does this SE go? Do they just like, they just have margaritas on the beach, or what? Like, how does that work?
Well, I mean, the funny thing about the new acronym that we're all in love with, it's the artist formerly known as freemium, and now we call it PLG, and it's a new thing. Like in 2006 when I joined Salesforce, we had freemium. You could go and sign up, and the limiter was time based. It was not. And at some point, I think we had like a free developer edition account that was free forever, but it was limited in throughput or functionality. So there's always been, with SaaS, there's been that benefit because there's this marginal cost that goes away to offer an account. But at some point, there's an orchestration that has to happen between the robots and the humans. And so maybe meaning the product, like the robots work for a simple buying process, a simple buyer, a simple straightforward application that you can get a self-guided tour and make a call on. But at some level, there has to be a human helping when there's more complexity. And what the dividing line of that complexity is, I think varies from product to product and company to company. But at some point, there is a buyer who is complex enough that is not going to part with hard-earned dollars without some understanding of technical capability. And so I think the two threads then that an SE ends up owning is there's a matching of business process to feature and functionality, that an orchestration that has to happen. So an SE has to be able to translate that. Like, I understand your business. Here's how it runs. Here's how it would work in the product. And that's not, the robots are not smart enough for that. And then there is a level of depth that has to happen of, if this thing is getting pushed into our complex technical environment, how is it going to play nicely? So it's security, infrastructure, integrations, that there's still a very, very vital role. It's just maybe now with PLG, the threshold by which an SE gets involved is higher because the product can do some more of that legwork up front.
Yeah, they get pushed down funnel, right? So rather than getting involved, feel like, being a demo, demo monkey, or like either do the demo, like there's different genres of demo monkeys, right? There's like do the demo monkey, and then there's like configure the demo instance demo monkey. And in both of those scenarios, usually what ends up happening, I remember having a conversation with I think actually Zach Lawrick was he was at Optimizely. He was your head of
he ran one of your SEs.
Yeah, we were talking about this, about like, using SE labor on like higher leverage stuff, as opposed to like, well, no, I'm just gonna like build a thing of Legos again, and then there's another one, right? And like use their brains for things that are like higher levered. And so what that means is like, post purchase. Now we're going to figure out about like how we integrate in the organization or whatever. Or maybe that's pre-purchase. Like, okay, cool. We've got a bunch of like Slack, like, or Zoom all throughout this organization, and like the AEs working to like, loop it together or whatever. And then we interact with it like, oh yeah, well, we have these other 4 business units that were acquired previously, and they run on these like, different Active Directories or whatever. So what's up with that? And then the AE is like, what? So it's kind of like spending that time. So it sounds like moving down funnel and like having their time reserved for like kind of more important things. And I think that's like a theme in general, right? It's like what we're doing is we're automating away or abstracting away a lot of the complexity for a lot of behaviors, right? Even if it's the AE, right?
Yeah,
like you
maybe tactically, like there's one, I think there's an example now of a demo used to be this very broad term for even the basic 8-click, here's how the product works, get comfortable, and then here's the deep dive, let's explore that every feature and function is there for what we need. Now there's these awesome tools that have emerged like Demo Stack, where you have this product tour kind of thing that is concept, not a demo. That's something that either can be self-guided, that the buyer can go through on their own to get exposed, or the AE has the power to spin that thing up from a template, and it's on the rails, right? It's like the guided tour.
You're not going to get lost. Yeah.
And so then the SE then is the firepower that gets brought in when we really then need to tailor something to a unique situation or build something that helps them, buy the dream. And then that's higher order work that an SE does that then is pushed further down the funnel, to your point.
Or alternatively, or not alternatively, additionally, like they do that bespoke work down there, and they're almost like a product manager for the AEs, right? The sellers, like, hey, make sure like they're the one who like babysits the feeds and waters the demo stack instance or the reprise instances or what have you, to make sure, actually we have this other sub case right here. We need an example of what it looks like when it has to like interfaces, or like how does the product interface when we got one organization that uses one login and one organization that uses Okta? Oh, well, actually we do handle that case. And so like I'll record a video on that, and maybe I'll throw together a guided tour on that and whatever, and like boom, now there's this piece of collateral that like a PMM could never put together, but like that SE could spend his or her time doing that. Okay, so they're not going away. So like their tattoos, they don't have to get their tattoos removed. There's still work for them.
Fortunately, there's still room for it. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking to your point about PM. One of the things that Zach did that I'll take all the credit for, since he's not on to defend himself, is
I'll send him a clip.
Yeah, the SE was the primary interface to the product organization. So, when these things would come up in deals, and we would even log them in Salesforce as gaps, and they'd be categorized. And the SE, there was like an SEPM alignment. So each SE, irrespective of whether they were enterprise or mid-market, they owned analytics, or they owned infrastructure, and they'd be aligned with the PM that was for that particular part of the product. And then monthly they would get together, review the gaps, and help to sort of normalize and consolidate that feedback from the field. And we deputized the SEs to own that, and then they felt good too, because then they were getting plugged into the product org. Every SE sort of secretly wants to be a product manager. Anyway,
they make the SE to product manager pipeline definitely is underappreciated. It's a superpower if you can get that humming in an organization.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a little organizational quirk that I think ended up serving us well.
Well, I literally remember Zach telling me about this, because we were doing our research for Atrium, because we did about 150 customer interviews the first half of 2016, just kind of talking with different leaders around how they use data to measure and manage and improve their teams. And so at the time we weren't 100% sure we were going to do sales, so we were talking to different other kind of categories of folks too, including SEs. And I remember him telling me about how they measured the SEs, and I think there were like custom Salesforce tasks, like task types, or it's just like demo instance creation or whatever, and they were like burdened with a certain amount of time. And I think that the funny thing that you were just kind of noting there is like you guys had a little bit of like a product boardy kind of like revenue gap, like pipeline associated revenue, or sorry, product associated pipeline gap. Say that 5 times fast. That you guys had modeled in Salesforce. Shocking, because you were former Salesforce guy, and but now what's funny about that is that that's just a product, right? Like product board. And I even think like user voice will have, I think they integrate with the CRM, so you can tie ops, right, to to feature deficits or whatever, in order to make that kind of allow the product organization to do like weighting on that. And there's like more and more, this is the thing I was saying earlier, is like there's more and more of that like product tech that's kind of coming along. And arguably you could say that like Optimizely was one of the early, like marketers, but also product, right? Like was one of the earliest kind of bundles of or like earliest product solutions there. How is selling to product like different than selling to sales leadership? Like we sell to sales leadership and sales operations, and at Salesforce, I'm sure you guys were like primarily selling to sales leaders and like business owners. How's selling a product different? And I'm sure it's changed a lot, but like how is it different then?
Yeah, well, there's even more nuance to it, because I'm sure even at Atrium or other companies that you've worked with, a product manager is quite a chemical composition, because in some cases it's very engineering, like someone who could write code, someone who is a former engineer. In other cases, it's a marketer. Which
genre are you? Which version? Like which subtype? What breed of dog are you?
Yeah, for sure. So you had to. There weren't a lot of, let's say, like core playbook. You could just say, all right, well, this is the messaging for a product manager, and these are the requirements that you should be gathering. You really had to treat each one as an individual. And the other thing you couldn't get hung up on was title and hierarchy, because
Oh
you
God,
wouldn't, it
right.
wasn't like, oh, we got to get to the head of product, because if you had a particular product manager, they were God in some organizations, even as an individual PM, because they just,
Oh man.
maybe they had been around for a long time, or they were a co-founder, that then there was this head of product that was added, but the co-founder really was the person who knew where everything was. And so I think the coaching there was just recognizing, trying to plot them on the continuum to figure out like, okay, we got to change our vocabulary here. If they're more of a technical PM, then over time at Optimizely, we had a product that was more effectively APIs on top of the stats engine, and so that it was called full stack, and we would focus that around the technical organizations, and the front end web, let me change the color of the button product, was for marketers. And so you had to, before you started blabbing, you really had discovery and figuring out the uniqueness of them. I think that happens in a lot of product organizations.
So I think there's an interesting point there, which is that like, and it's probably actually not unique to product. It's like when the externally consumable, this is one of the things I talk with like my reps about and everybody about, like in pre-call planning, is like doing like pre-discovery or pre-call planning, where you can use externally available information to inform like what is probably the scenario within the organization. And some of those signals are like super great, right? And they're like sufficient, and they're highly correlated, right? And then in other situations, like as you're and like title's a good example of this. This is the VP of sales. Okay, I kind of know what he or she is gonna be like, right? And then in other sales, the title is not a very good leading indicator, right? And then like maybe you get a little bit nuanced there. You can be like, oh, okay, well, if a title's like this, and then look at their tenure, right? And then maybe look at what their title was in the last organization.
That's
like,
the
oh,
thing.
they're a PM here.
Oh, where they came from.
Oh, they were a VP of product there, and it just happens to be that this organization right here, like, comes out of Facebook, where everybody has like, title is like manager, even though they're like an SVP or whatever. So like, making sure that your reps are well equipped from a pre-call planning standpoint to like read the tea leaves correctly, such that they can actually understand. Like there may be signal there, it just may not like be as obvious. There just may be a little bit of like permutations. And then if there's not signal, which unfortunately for like a lot of organizations, there's just like not signal, right? Like if you run an SMB velocity sales motion, like there's no information about, like there's very little information about a prospect that's externally available, like when you're calling into some local mom and pop. But like you just got to make sure that you're extracting all that information via Disco, and just like not making assumptions there. And my hypothesis would be is that I wonder if that shows up in ecosystems that are only starting to adopt technology. And like this is the big thing with Optimizely. I guess irony of ironies with like product managers, right? Is like they're creating technology, but like no technology available to them to like make their jobs better. Like their lives exist in spreadsheets and PowerPoint and so on and so forth. Has that changed over time? In the Redpoint portfolio right now, I think you guys have Launch Darkly, which I think you could argue is product management technology. Has that changed over time? Has it become easier to read the tea leaves, or is it still kind of like tough to do? So you really got to like get in there and understand what type of animal you're dealing with.
I don't know. When I think about it, I think there's like a crazy amount of tea leaves now. That the problem is less getting those, even for somebody. You use the SMB mom and pop example. Like they still leave a breadcrumb trail on the internet of stuff that they're into. And I actually think it's the opposite problem. Is there's all these feeds from Clearbit and all the social selling tools and all the things that you can do in planning. And then it somehow, it pulls away your own intuition to go and have a candid, human, curious conversation with that person to figure out what they're about. Because even if I would think even for you guys at Atrium, you think, oh, VP of sales, here's our persona, here's the talk track for VP of sales. Like the continuum of people who are very operationally rigorous
Sure.
and very data-driven sales leaders versus people who maybe are more classically trained sales leaders who are
That's classically trained. Oh my God, you've been a seller in your life. Classically trained.
well, you know what I
That's
mean, right? Like,
dude. Oh, I know what you mean.
the
That's
gift of
delightful.
gab, the
Oh,
extroverts,
that's
the
yeah,
yeah.
classically trained. And by trained, I mean like, oh, you mean like an AE who like got older, right? Yeah, exactly. So what you're
Yeah.
describing is like the 10% of the world who like are very data-driven sales. I mean, obviously the
Yeah.
transition is happening. There's a secular movement, but like, yes, there's this continuum for sure.
But
And you got to
you
figure
could
out
make
what
those
their deal is.
assumptions, right? Like
No, yeah,
you could look at someone's LinkedIn and go, okay, they're this or that. And until you actually have a focused, single-threaded, like trying to really engage with someone curiously, asking open-ended questions, trying to figure out what they're about, who they are. I mean, to me, that is the essence of a great salesperson, is
oh
really
yeah,
actually the curiosity and the ability to do smart discovery. Because if you do
totally,
thoughtful discovery, people are going to tell you stuff they don't tell other people, and that's the
totally,
stuff then to drive a sales process.
yeah.
So to your point, I don't think it's a question of kind of reading the tea leaves, because you're going to get a certain amount now because everyone is online all the time, but it
Sure.
doesn't substitute for that genuine connection. And the other thing too, I guess I would say, is that's the point of having humans involved in the process, because
Yeah, because otherwise we can figure out a way to automate it, right? Like,
yeah,
and there are some martech that does this, whether it's like, oh God, what's Jolly's company, like Mutiny or one of our Atrium customers, Intellimize, like permute the website in order to like be like, oh, hello friend, hello fellow kids, you are a B2B buyer. Here is your logo. Obviously, like that stuff helps with conversion, but we want to interface with a human, assuming the ASPs are there. Yeah, on the disco thing, I mean, this is like I'm onboarding 4 reps right now, and like I keep talking with them about how like yeah, discovery is not just about asking questions in a thoughtful way. It's also about revealing things to the person through questions, right? That they didn't necessarily understand, and the way that you can continue to earn that. Like the best discovery conversations feel like a conversation, feel like a business conversation, but you actually are like interrogating the hell out of them. It just doesn't feel
yeah,
like it. And the way that you earn that is like they tell you something, you say, "Oh, that's really cool," kind of like blah, right? And like you do a little kind of like chest beating there, like not too much. You're not talking about your product. You're talking about like oh, it's like this this webinar I saw the other day. There's this really bright guy from Redpoint. Here, I'll send you the link. He was talking about all those sort of things, and then 15 minutes later, like, did we just become best friends? And you
right.
spilled your guts to me about like everything that's broken in your organization. Like, yeah, great. I do think, and I think one thing that you noted there that's really important is you said single threaded. And this is one of the things that I constantly harp on with my AEs is that like party disco don't work. Party disco does not work because like nobody wants to admit that they don't know what's going on in front of like 4 other people or whatever. And so I think that there's an interesting question here. And then the other thing I really wanted to like, and this ties with the other question I want to ask you about around like two-legged sales, right? Where you have like disparate stakeholders, or like they both have to be involved, and maybe even they're like kind of like they like to fight with each other. So like, how does that work for discovery? Right, like because you probably can't have them in the same room. So does that just mean you got to like break them up and like elongate the sales cycle? And then moreover though, then once you like have that information from those like parallel discovery conversations, how do you like bring everybody together for some marriage counseling and get them to buy? Like, how did you
Yeah.
guys deal with that optimizing? It's like it's a pain in the ass.
Well, that's why everyone's compensated so
Yeah.
handsomely for the work
Yeah,
that
I
they do.
know.
Look,
Totally.
I mean, I think the first thing is to admit that that's the game on the ground. Like, you can try to bury your
Sure.
head or be lazy about it, or you can do the work. And what I mean by that is,
Yeah.
let's just take a classic, just a very classic cycle for a thought exercise. Someone comes to the site, they're interested, they fill out a form goes to the SDR, SDR follows up with a call. So
Mhm.
at that point, there should be a step that they say, who else needs to be involved in this evaluation? Because no organization that's buying enterprise software buys with a single person. Nobody's sticking their neck out by themselves to just ram something through an organization. So more people get involved. So let's have that conversation up front to map the project team. And we actually made this part of the buying framework. We called this O deal, was the ideal optimized lead deal. Like, we try to define if everything broke the perfect way, this was the platonic ideal of how something would flow. And we ended up actually making that visible to the buyer. So at the end of the first call, we would show them this thing and say, hey, look, honed over thousands of transactions, we feel like this is the path to getting the answer as fast as possible. Yes or no? We're not asking for yes. We're just saying this is going to be the path of least resistance to get an answer. And one of the things we need to find out is who plays a role in the evaluation, use, and value of this product. And so inevitably, you know, if you've earned some right, they'll tell you. If not, then they might give you one other person, or what will happen is you set up a demo and then you see that there's 5 people that say yes. So how many reps would then go and email each of those 5 people and say, hey, look, 10 minutes. I just want 10 minutes just to make sure that hour is a good use of your time.
No. You just show up to the demo and you shoot from the hip, right? No,
maybe not.
Keep going. Sorry. In the Travis sales organization, how ought one deal with that?
Well, I think it's doing the legwork to make those to the point of single threaded, right? So I'm going to go now and reach out individually and say, hey, my role here is to help you evaluate this product. I'm an expert in my product and moreover, how to help people make a decision how to buy it. I'm an evaluation specialist. And so that you have a great experience, I want to just understand, why are you coming to this meeting? Like really simply. You can even be one question.
I want to make the best use of your time because you're so delightful, and I want to make the best.
You're making that sound a little like subversive, but that's if you're authentically.
I'm not being.
Actually, I really legitimately want to make sure that's a good use of your time. So that's why I'm reaching out.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think to your question, your larger question is, you've got to actually. You have to be the one to stitch them all together. And what's interesting is if you end up having this conversation, let's say the two-sided, like there's marketing involved and there's engineering involved, and you manage those as disparate threads in a more complicated sales cycle, you actually then provide value to them because you're the connector. You tell them shit that they weren't telling each other.
The marriage counselor. Oh my God. And
totally. Now that's the move to, oh wow, they're actually a key member of this project team, even though they work for this company and they're trying to sell me something. But they have info and context that they can help connect the dots between the teams. And then I think then at some point, of course, the threads will merge as you get to this point of, hey, this is going on someone's budget. This is going on someone's hook OKRs to deliver a successful project. And then that starts to merge and you figure out who owns and who's supporting, because inevitably it's going to fall into one of those threads. But managing them separately as long as possible, it's more work, but I think it ultimately results in a faster time to resolution on the process. Yeah,
for sure. I think the big thing there is the notion of herding the cats, doing the work to collect the information, and then being able to like merge it together in a way that is obviously, you know, most conducive for you getting a deal done is a very, very, very powerful thing. I think one, to your kind of point there around kind of like transferring information. This is Pete's like gigantic deck of sales strategy slides here. And so this is a visualization that I do with my reps, where like you have an initial stakeholder, then you start, you know, interacting with additional stakeholders, but then importantly, what you have to do is do information transmission back and forth between the stakeholders, right? And like, you know, because what ends up happening is oftentimes reps are like, don't these people talk? And it's like, no, dude, they don't.
No,
they don't. It's not their job.
Yeah.
Like they're not thinking about like, I just had a really good meeting with Travis. I should really go tell the other stakeholders in the organization exactly how excited I am about, you know, working with Optimizely. No, they're right into their next meeting.
Well, the other thing too is this realization that it is not their job to buy your stuff. Their job is clearly something else. And so your
Exactly.
job is to help them buy that. And you are a professional at helping them buy. And one of the core values of you as a professional evaluation specialist is this dot connection. I mean, even you told me, Pete, tactical is more appreciated in these sorts of calls. Like,
Yep.
even how you take notes, taking notes where you're quoting the things that you're hearing when you're having these
Yep.
one-on-one conversations. And then you have this 10-minute call before the first demo where the engineering leader says, we need to do this, this, and this. And then in that demo, the rapport that you build from, hey, Pete, when we were talking a couple days before getting ready for this meeting, you said we wanted to accomplish this, this, and this. Well, here's the part of the product that, and using their exact vocabulary, and in that same way of tying those disparate groups together, is when I was talking to Pete, he said this. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that that's the way that he felt. Now
Oh,
you've
that's so
injected
interesting.
yourself.
It's a disco tieback, but instead of it being a feature disco tieback, it's like a
Group to group.
it's like a stakeholder to stakeholder disco
That's the
tieback.
counseling, right? The counseling is, what I heard from the spouse was this, and let's talk about what that means and how that feels, because you might not have heard that before. And I, as this neutral third party, am going to help you to communicate.
I really like the professional evaluation specialist. I think it's like a very helpful framing. So I'm a product marketer by background before I started pretending to be a sales leader. And so like, I'm a big fan of like, turns of phrase that really get the point across, or as I like to, I know you work with Kendall Collins at Salesforce back in the day, commercial storytelling, right? Very effective commercial storytelling.
That's it.
And so what you're describing, I think, is really important, where it's like, oh, I'm a seller. No, I'm going to help you evaluate this, right? That's what I do. I help you evaluate this. And if I do a good job and you have need, we should be able to get there, right? But like, I'm not trying to shove a square peg in a round hole, and I'm definitely not trying to sell ice to Eskimos, because like only an asshole does that. And so like one of yeah, professional evaluation specialist, the phrase that I like to use when I explain to sales to like new folks, especially like funders or like engineers or whatever, it's like a consultant that happens to have a predilection for a particular solution. But like, I'm going to consult you if it turns out you don't have the need, or like you broke your CRM or whatever, in a way that like Atrium can't help you with. Like, I'm going to tell you that because like, I don't want to put a square peg in a round hole, like, and then you're going to go to some other organization and like, I want you to buy from me there when it is a fit and it does create economic value for both of us. The mapping the project team is really interesting. And of course, like, how that matches with PLG, I think, is really fascinating, because like, obviously Optimize Day wasn't like, hey, let's just like start using this, right? Or like Launch Dark, like, hey, let's just like start. Like, those are more traditional direct sales motions where someone's showing up, they have intent, et cetera. What you have, like, use Atrium as an example, when it's so easy to turn something on, like whether it's Datadog or New Relic or something like Atrium, where it takes like 90 seconds to turn on like a really smoking analytics harness for your sales team. What I think is important is like, you're pulling that forward, that proof of value forward, but then it's unlikely, unless you're like, you know, $99 a month or whatever, that an individual is going to buy. So then what ends up happening is that mapping the project team, that mutual plan conversation still needs to happen. It just kind of happens after that first like titillation. And I guess now what's funny about it is like, the titillation could be product, or it could be some product proxy like Demo Stack or
Yep.
like Reprise or Turiel or whatever. But you still got to have that like commercial conversation where you map the project team, et cetera. What did you guys use for, and then you had the note that like the O deal, right? The ideal optimizely deal. I mean, that sounds like mutual plan software, right? Where you're just like, here's our roadmap, kids. And then like, you
Yeah.
like have that template and you fork it off. Was that just like a Google Sheet or a Google Doc, or what did you guys use for that?
I try to touch up the gray, but we're talking about a few years ago. So we were in the
Right,
dark
exactly.
ages of G Suite, shared Google spreadsheets, or maybe
Yeah.
Asana. And yeah, there's now some purpose built tools that are cool for doing that kind of stuff. Pete, the thing I was
Yeah.
going to say, as you were talking about the project team and then where does the product live in that project team, I think there's potentially a cool metaphor where the product is the new business AE. Like we talk about hunting and farming, and to me these are concepts that are, frankly very, very antiquated, because
Right?
in the modern SaaS relationship with a customer, both prospect and customer are parallel concepts. Like the minute that somebody starts an evaluation, you have to treat them like a customer, even if they're not paying you.
Yes.
Because if they have a shitty experience, they're going to tell other people about it, and you're going to feel the effects of that. But
and they're going to believe that they're like, oh, well, like this, even though we would be like, whoa, you don't have CS yet, it's support or whatever. They're like, well, I don't know that. Like, this just feels like I imagine this was what it's going to be like when I'm a customer too, right? They don't know.
yeah, and vice versa. Every customer is not sold out, so there's still a prospect.
Totally.
And so I thought that the metaphor that I found useful is like, the product can maybe do the land. Maybe that's the motion that you have. The PLG motion is product as new business AE closing that first dollar exchanged. But then there's going to be evaluations to either move from department to department, or to move from the entry level package to the enterprise package, or to have this add-on. And when there's an evaluation, that's why you have an evaluation specialist. And then there's even, that's to me was more elegant to integrate AE and CSM was there to deliver on the perceived value that caused you to purchase it. They are the activation specialist.
They're the promise deliverer, the promise make gooder.
Yeah, and that in that time you might be consuming more and paying more for the decision you already made to buy. That's that organic expansion of, oh, we're same product, but now we're using more of it, so now we got to pay more. So AE doesn't get involved there, but AE is the person that gets involved when there is a question: should I buy this thing or not? And if there's a question, that's what needs an evaluation and needs the project management and orchestration of that evaluation to get to that decision, yes or no, as quickly as possible. And I think that's the other thing too, is for an AE to say genuinely to a prospect, hey, our interests are aligned here. We want to get to yes or no as quickly as possible. Like a quick no is totally fine for me, because then I can go deploy my time to places where there can be a yes. And so we actually are aligned to go through this project together, because if we do, we'll get to yes or no with the least amount of headache possible. And if it's no, that's okay as well if we do it quickly.
Yep. I wanted to kind of share a couple of resources here. So this video by Go Vanderkooi here is really fantastic. It's on PLG, but it's actually not. The funny thing, like most Jocko stuff, it's like actually not about PLG. Like PLG is just like one component of it. But like he's, instead of the funnel metaphor, he's got the the bow tie, right, where you're coming in like this, and then your expansion happens over time, which I think is like very much aligns with what you're talking about. Like they are not sold out. It is not one and done. And I think that really changes how AEAMs, there's like the notion of like AEAM abstraction or AECSM abstraction really kind of changes there, where like the AE is not like, all right, I'm done, have fun. And like we see this quite a bit at Atrium, where what like one of the superpowers with Atrium is, again, it takes like 90 seconds to set up. So like you'll get people in an organization who will just like, an SDR manager will show up and they'll just like turn on an Atrium account, right? And like, maybe there's like 5 other SDR managers and there's like 10 AE managers and like, it's 2 levels of management over, but like these guys will just turn it on, and like what the AE will start working with that individual. Oftentimes they'll transact with that person because like they get them to value, and they're like, oh yeah, this is like so much better than like the wall of Looker charts that like no one pays attention to. But then what happens is like the AE keeps the account, right? Because like then what he or she wants to do is like, okay, well, like let's talk about what this looks like for the other SDR managers, or maybe that we actually have a term that we call a minimum viable transaction. Maybe the MVT there is not that single SDR manager, but maybe it's like, it's the 3 outbound SDR managers and the 2 inbound SDR managers. Oh, we'll like talk with you guys later. We're just going to get these guys going on first. And so but the AE keeps that. And we have a bunch of customers that are in this PLG game. And like in our case, we're not like full blown PLG, but like Figma does the same thing. right? Where like the AE closes initial transactions and then like starts jumping over to, and like a lot of the times we actually even model the opportunities different. We have two different expansion op types. We have a pursuit expansion type, which is like higher calorie, like, okay, now let's go get the AE team. Let's go get the CS team. And then we have an expansion op that's called a license request, which is kind of what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is like in a lot of these organizations, like organizations are not monolithic. And so like there's different natural pockets. So like if you're Figma, for instance, you'll go from like product group to product group, like, oh, well, like let's sell to this product group over here who like runs this app, but maybe the organization has like 5 different apps, right?
Yeah.
And the same is got launched darkly, whatever, like, oh, this product has feature on T organization is using feature flagging internally for actually, continuous deployment or whatever, but actually they're not ready to put it on production yet. It's like, oh, okay, like we'll close that. And then we'll go like have a conversation about how we can get feature flags out in production, because it's going to like, make things more impactful for you guys. The kind of the additional thing I wanted to ask you about was, when you are in your role as a investor, and I know that you do portfolio support, or sorry, I know that you're helping Redpoint get better at being sellers, right? And like provide a better like user experience and customer
facing.
I imagine
customer facing professionals. How about that? Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so, but I think there's another thing. I imagine you do portfolio support as well. And I think there's a question there around like, what are some of the things that you found are impactful in like helping non-sales founders? And I think you probably have had this experience a little bit like at Optimize, and then of course at Front. What are good ways of helping founders who don't necessarily have a sales background or even like sales familiarity kind of get it? To kind of like make sales leadership's job easier and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Aside from making them read my book, obviously, but like
obviously, which is it's a standard part of the package now that we mail out along with the Tumblr and Sonos and all of that.
Sonos, damn dude, I want a Redpoint term sheet.
We got to try to find ways to differentiate, because it's just money at the bottom. Anyway, okay. So there's 2 things that come to mind. The first one is more emotional, and then the second one's more tactical. The first thing that I'll say, and I do this with every technical founder, of which that's the majority of the venture-backed companies, likely are somebody that was an engineer or product manager, is I say, they'll go, oh, I don't know anything about sales. And I say, cool, interesting. So it's not just you working at the company, right? You convinced other people to come and work for the company. We have employees.
Yeah, I did.
We have employees. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay, cool. And then we're talking because you convinced venture capitalists to, part with their hard raised capital to give you to work on this company, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. I say, great. Welcome to sales. Kidding aside,
you've been here for a minute. You just didn't know.
You didn't know it, right? Or you didn't want to admit it because there's a negative connotation of the word. Yeah. And that's something we're all trying to fight, that it doesn't have the same academic standing as marketing or finance or product or design or these other disciplines, but it isn't no less intellectually challenging and no less important. And the first point that I make is, look, sales is the art of convincing someone to believe what you believe. And if what you believe is noble and just, then it is a noble craft. And you have been doing it in how you convince people to join and work for the company. You did it to convince people to give you money to fund it. And so now this is just another application of that core skill set. So that's the emotional argument. And I think that kind of cuts the scar tissue a little bit.
Yeah. They're like, okay, cool.
You know how to do
yeah.
this.
You're priming them a little bit.
It's not particle physics, right? So then the second part is I would posit that there is no less engineering challenge to designing a sales process as there is to designing a product. I think that there's a ton of very similar skill set. And so for a product or technical founder who thinks about frameworks and thinks about inputs and outputs, I think that there's an analog to the service design of how you layer humans that interact with humans on the other side in an elegant and thoughtful way. And if you can get them to think about it like an engineering challenge, it's a
exactly.
messier engineering challenge. It's not ones and zeros, because you have the human variability, but it's similar in how you think about how do each of those points in the customer cycle, and how does somebody flow through those from I've never heard of this product to, oh my God, I need to tell everybody how fantastic it is. And I think that that's an engineering problem, and there's an analog. And so that's another way to get them to feel like, oh, okay, I've got the core skill set. It's just applied in a different domain. And what sales is not what I think it is of the silver-tongued serpents reaching around and grabbing money out of the wallet of people unsuspectingly. It's like, it's a very thoughtful and engineered process.
Yeah, for sure. I think the process, one of the ways that I like to describe sales to engineering founders and what have you, and actually here, I'm going to drop this deck into the chat here. This founder-led selling maturity stages deck, the kind of first half of which is like, where's this like sales hate come from? Is, a sales organization is just a factory. Right, it's just a factory, right? It's a revenue factory, and like we've got different assembly lines, especially with thanks to Salesforce, who both created the database in which we can model the state of like how things are being handed off, and then also the innovation associated with like some of the abstraction there. But it's like, it's a factory. Now the machines are kind of sloppy because they're people. Right. And like, the tolerances are not the same as like, oh, well, like it's this while loop or whatever. And it's always going to execute the same way again and again and again and again. But like, not only are the machines sloppy, the other machines that they're interfacing with are also sloppy, the customers, right? There's a lot of like wiggle room there, but it still is like a machine. It still is a factory. And so to the extent that we can like design it and then instrument it, and that, of course, that's obviously where things like Atrium come in, like we're going to make ourselves more successful. And so I think one of the things that founders oftentimes bang their head against is, sales leaders bang their head against with founders who don't quite get it, is like they'll show up, and you see this, it's to the detriment of a lot of these like PLG organizations, like the 1.0 organizations, like whether you're talking about like Dropbox or maybe even Front and things like that, where like, it's like, hey, look, like we're going to continue to work on these features down here that are like user facing or whatever, even though sales is like, oh my gosh, I really need single sign-on, right? Or I really need, and actually I think one of the things that was like kind of like a bellwether moment in this was when Slack went from saying whatever it was, like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, where Stuart Butterfield was like, "Oh, maybe we'll never have salespeople," and I'm sure his board at that point was like, "Come here, we're gonna go talk in this other room over here," and then like however many like years later, they shipped Slack Enterprise Grid, where essentially what you can have is you have multiple Slack instances that like talk with each other within an organization. Like that is can you imagine the engineering effort associated with that? It's astronomical, right?
Yeah.
Astronomical, but and complete, and like a feature that no mid-market organization would ever give any shits about, but like Amazon or like Cisco or like any of these like big organizations who have like, so we've acquired like 20 companies over the last like 10 years or so, and like, some of them we've moved on to our onto our domain, and some of them we haven't, and so on and so forth. And so when you see these like crazy enterprise features being shipped, that's where you see like, okay, cool, that like symbiosis is going on, because like sales is talking to product and engineering in a way that's being heard, kind of like what you were talking about, like, okay, here's the size of the opportunity associated with this. I'm not making this up, right?
Yeah. I think the slight riff that I would give on that is, I don't know if certainly whatever the tactics are of how that feedback comes back into the org that builds the product, that's mileage varies there. But what emerges for me about that story is it's actually linked to this idea of customer centricity, like really being intimate and obsessive about how do we deliver value to the customers that we care about. And so I think that's another leg of the argument back to a founder is, if ultimately what you care about is delivering value to the customers that choose to buy and keep renewing your product, well, then that's the entity that is supersedes marketing, sales, customer success, and product. And it's not necessarily about just responding to whatever they ask us to build, but it's understanding them really deeply and understanding how they perceive value from what we deliver. And then if you have this entity, if you're really, really aligned about what that definition is, and this is another one of these cliched 3-letter acronyms, but if you're very principled about ICP, like you say, these are the quantitative and objective characteristics of the companies that we think we can deliver the most value for, and we draw a line around that, it makes all the stuff that goes through the customer process easier. Like how we find the right qualified leads, how we convince them to part with their money and buy the product, how we onboard them, how we manage them ongoing. Like all of those questions are easier when you're aligned about who the customer is. And I think in the case of Slack, it was likely this sort of emergent behavior that because of that first motion, that they started to see these pockets of energy light up in all these various parts of a company like Amazon. And they're like, okay, cool. Well, if we want to earn the right to have this very significant relationship, then we need that kind of grid capability. And we need humans to be able to connect the dots in all of these organizations, because the product isn't going to do it on its own. And that's a beautiful motion. You know, the guy that runs that was my first boss when I became an AE. Bob Fratty was my RVP at Salesforce. And he has that kind of engineering discipline around how do we run a framework to combine the energy that the product generates on its own, but it doesn't jump to each organization automatically in all cases. And so that's the role that the human plays, is to connect those dots and make that into this wall-to-wall relationship.
That's so funny about like what you're describing is like a behavior of internal selling, right? Of like the sales leader selling to, in this case, the founder. And this is actually a buddy of mine does a lot of writing on product management, a guy named Lenny Rachitsky. And like product management, I guess it's another thing, like product management does a ton of selling internally as well, because you have to like persuade engineers that this is the right thing to do. You have to persuade people to fund the project or whatever. But I think what I was kind of like smiling about there is, I imagine that Bob was at Salesforce, right?
Yep.
And, who knows if if that internal selling behavior is not successful, instead of being a $50 billion public company that then got acquired, or like whatever it was, $30 billion public company that then gets acquired by Salesforce for $50 billion, which is like a very impressive outcome. Maybe Slack ends up in the doldrums like Dropbox, and never gets to fulfillment of that without that successful internal sales conversation, however it was prosecuted. Like you were kind of saying, like, hey, well, you have an aspiration to like bring this wonderfulness to all these people. Well, like, look at this TAM inside of the enterprise that like is like otherwise would not see the light, like the light of Slack or whatever. Or alternatively, like, actually we're all here for the customer, irrespective of what our titles is. Well, however it's prosecuted, if that's not a successful internal sales behavior, who knows what happens?
It was one of my major wipeouts doing it for the first time at Optimizely. Was we had this separation that happened between product and market, where we were building for the practitioner. A/B testing you'll actually use for the individual to swipe a credit card and deploy the snippet to a site. And where our market opportunity was in very sophisticated enterprises. And looking back, there was clearly a miss of that internal sales to pull the product and engineering organizations into the muck with us about what Coca-Cola was asking for and American Express was asking for, and where we were off building for tech companies. And I don't know if that's the difference between wildly successful and not, but certainly something that was a very hard lesson to learn, that you've got to build the organizations around. It seems simple to say, it's hard to do in practice, but what our prime objective is delivering value for customers and being obsessive about understanding what that is, and then how to articulate that.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, we take our lumps. ideally we can still learn from them and then maybe fix things on the same cap table. But even if we can't fix things on the same cap table, I think the silver lining is like, we take those lumps and like we deploy them other places through kind of like, hard learned lessons being shared here, or like writings or whatever. Or even if not, even if it's just externalized to the market, like, I mean, if you look at all the people who work at LaunchDarkly and Amplitude and like, Product Board or whatever, I'm sure there's a lot of learnings that came out of Optimizely that are now making those folks like super, super, super successful. So it's kind of like, it's the tech sales circle of life, right?
Pete,
Just
you didn't know Power Hour was a form
hold
of
Simba up.
therapy.
I know, right? Wonderful. We're out of time. This was super dope. Thank you very much, Travis. One of the things that I love about this is I get to learn all sorts of inside baseball and so on and so forth, and it like feeds my info addiction as relates to sales there. So I feel that I just got topped up. So thank you very much for that, everyone. Next week we've got a really fantastic sales leader joining us, sales operations person this time, as opposed to sales engineer turned sales leader turned investor vacationer. We've Jennifer Liao from Hopin. She's previously the head of sales operations at Lyft, previously the head of sales operations at MemSQL. She's super badass. So she's going to be with us next week. So Travis, thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you around. Okay.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Enjoyed it.
See ya.